everyone, my name is Evie Lupine. Welcome back to my channel, and today I have another video for you all. Today we are going to be talking about my experience at Leather Rain 2019. Now I am pulling the curtain back a little bit for this video because I've actually been going to this conference for many years now, and I've always sort of hidden it a little bit. I've kept it a little bit secret because it is a smaller convention. It's a little bit more niche, I guess you could say, but we've just been having some amazing conversations at this conference, and not only this year but for pretty much every year I've gone, and I really want to get it out there and share that information with you guys. So we're talking about Leather Rain. What is it? Well, it's a BDSM conference that has been going on for 13 years now as I am recording this video, that is held in the Pacific Northwest, and it is a conference that is focused on the leather and the MS portions of the BDSM lifestyle. And they really take an approach that emphasizes the discussion aspect of BDSM learning. They really emphasize not so much about techniques, but more about like how do you actually like have a DS relationship, talking about trauma and healthy relationships and consent violation issues and CNC and like all of these sort of maybe more nitty-gritty, not as cut and dry sort of areas of kink, as opposed to something like Kink Fest, which is a lot more about like flogging technique or blood play or how to give oral sex, or something that's very like, again, technique focused as opposed to more discussion focused, more talking about the ins and outs of actually being a person in a lifestyle, especially somebody in a high power exchange relationship. Now, I mentioned MS and leather, and what do those things mean? I guess I'll start with leather, and I will try my best. If I find a really good definition, I'll like put it up on the screen somewhere, because it's really hard to synthesize it into like one really quick and easy way to think about it. I guess I would say it's a particular way of being part of the BDSM community that has a shared set of values and culture and history that sometimes gets referred to as like the one true way, or like the more traditional way of doing BDSM in North America. I don't really necessarily think either one of those things are true, but they do emphasize things like community service and giving back and generosity, and so it tends to have a little bit more of a sharing, supportive community compared to the larger world of BDSM, which can be very disparate and not necessarily be super connected. So that's one way of thinking about leather. MS stands for Master Slave, which is traditionally a total power exchange relationship style or authority transfer, whichever you prefer. It also gets lumped in with owner property, which is very similar but basically uses different terminology because not everybody likes using the term master and slave, which is totally legitimate and a subject we will get into in this video a little bit. And that's basically what it is. It is a, again, more niche thing compared to other types of BDSM conferences, which can have a little bit of something for everyone. This is really more about sort of that specific way of doing BDSM, although it is open to everyone. It's not just for people who are into MS already, people who are leather. It's for everyone in the BDSM community, so long as you feel like you can learn from and respect those experiences. It's a great way of learning a lot about kink. I have taken away so much from these conferences over the years, and I'm very, very grateful to them. Now, Leather Rain itself is typically hosted over Veterans Day weekend, so it's a 3-day conference. Typically on the Friday of the event, there are a couple of classes, there is an opening ceremony, and also there are something that's very special to Leather Rain that I haven't seen in a lot of other places, which would be Friday intensives. These are basically really long classes that do a deep dive into one subject area. The first year that we went, we did a Friday intensive with Lee Harrington, which like completely revolutionized my relationship to rope bondage. That was about like connection and intimacy using rope. Other times they have had things like talking about trauma and abuse, which is something that they did this year, or attachment styles, or navigating CNC, or primal play, or just any of a myriad of other things. If it's something where you want to really deep dive, something you really want to focus on, that is what the Friday intensives are for. Now, this year, I was a bad community attendee because I really delayed on getting my tickets this year. I wasn't 100% sure that I wanted to go. My energy just wasn't really there. So by the time I got my ticket, I was unable to get a spot for the Friday intensives because you do have to pay an extra $50, I think it is, to be able to go to those intensives. So I just gave them a skip this year, and I actually didn't really go on Friday at all. So I'll speak from my experiences at past Friday events. So typically there are things that start about like mid-afternoon-ish. It is held in a hotel, so most of the attendees are in the hotel, so the schedule is somewhat designed around that. There is typically a breakfast that happens. There is some sort of hospitality room where you can go to get a break or snacks or just unwind away from the rest of the convention or take a break from classes. There's a vendor area that is open starting on Friday, and then there's an opening ceremony, which is basically introducing everybody to the event. There is sometimes a keynote speaker who will give a speech talking about different areas related to leather or honoring a particular person in the community, and basically that's a quick summary of what happens on Friday of the events. Now, overall, the weekend is structured quite similarly to other education-focused conferences. There are classes during the day. There are also sometimes special events during the daytime. And then in the evening, there is a dungeon party. Now, Friday night also had a dungeon party, but I live stream on Friday nights, and I felt really guilty about missing that because it's hard to be away from your job. So instead of going to the Friday night play party, I stayed at home and I live streamed instead of going to the dungeon party because we live close enough to where it was tenable to actually drive during the daytime for the event and then go back versus like the cost of getting a hotel room. So that's what happened on Friday. Saturday is when things really get into gear. Classes start at 9:30, so I was up very early in the morning getting ready to go to class, and that is where everything really started off for us. Now, I just want to give everybody maybe a look at the schedule here because they do give out a little pamphlet that has the schedule for everything, so you guys can get a really good sense of like what happens. So I don't know how well this is going to like show the detail of anything, but this was the schedule for Friday, so you guys can kind of see like when everything actually was and what goes on. So for example, again, there was the dungeon party like I mentioned, the opening ceremonies, there was the hospitality, and of course the registration area has to be open if you want to actually go to the event. Now there were a few classes that sounded really interesting on Friday. Now, this is not necessarily the final schedule. Things did change during the course of the event itself, but there was one that was called On the Loose, which was about being a service submissive without a dominant partner, which I thought would be really interesting. There was classes talking about conflict resolution and what do you do if a relationship starts out with both people having baggage or trauma from previous relationships. There were classes talking about cultivating mindfulness, or talking about how BDSM changes as you get older, or how to have restorative conflict resolution. Just things that like don't really get talked about at other conventions. And if I could do things over, and this will be a theme for this video, I would absolutely have a time turner. I would go back and I would take some of these classes because I really regret missing them. Now on Saturday, here is a little bit of a sense of the schedule for you guys, the sorts of classes that they offered. Now Saturday is definitely the most jam-packed day of the event. It is where the most things are going on. There are 3 class blocks, and then there is a nooner sort of between the first 2 classes where people get lunch because they do provide boxed lunches for people at the hotel, and you get to just have a little bit of an extra bonus discussion with some people. So the first class that we went to on Saturday was called A Pair or More Apart, which was from Master Scott and Slave Lion. They are actually from the Great Lakes region, and oh my god, if I can do an interview with them, I would love to. They are amazing people. They are leather title holders as well, and the class A Pair or More Apart, and I can actually just read you guys the description for this because they also have that in this booklet, is as one digs deeper into your MS dynamic, many find themselves along the way having to ask themselves some serious questions, some coming from within and some coming from others in the larger kink and leather communities as well as the vanilla world. This class will explore some of these ideas and questions, including codependency, the psychology of consent/non-consent, navigating outside relationships, isolation and identity, and the fear, the loss thereof. So that kind of gives you a sense of the sort of classes they offer here. It was a great discussion. In particular, there were a few things that came up during that class that I thought were really interesting. One was talking about the use of the term master and slave given the cultural history that we have in North America with slavery that's not that long ago, and not to mention the ongoing slavery that still exists in the world. So that was interesting. And then we also talked about things like, again, losing identity and isolation from the vanilla world, misconceptions with that. And actually, one big area that really stuck out in my brain was codependency. And I actually have a whole video I'm going to be making about that, so look out for that soon. But I loved that class. It was great. 10 out of 10, and it really started to put me in the headspace for actually taking all the rest of the classes. Now, after that, there was the nooner. And there were basically 2 choices for that on Saturday, because Saturday is the only day that they have the nooners. And one was Seattle leather history, which I've actually taken before. So I was like, okay, I know I have the notes for that already. What's the other thing? Well, the other thing was a right side of the slash sort of support slash discussion group. And the person who actually started it was like thinking they just wanted like a nice quiet place to go between classes, and like didn't think anybody was going to show up. And let me tell you, it was packed. I think I counted there were like 25 people in the room at some point, and it was really actually like empowering to me. And I hope that doesn't sound too cheesy, but it was a group of like all S-type people, or people who were kind of maybe exploring that but weren't really sure if they were there yet. So there were slaves, there were submissives, there were bottoms, there were switches who were kind of there in their S-leaning capacity, let's say. And we just got to like have a little sharing circle. We got to talk about our problems, we got to talk about things that we were really interested in. And it was a whole wide spectrum of things. There were people there who were brand new to the concept, and we really came together to kind of talk about, what does this mean to me? How can you start exploring that? Recommendations, ideas, so on and so forth. Then there were other people who were like, yeah, I'm widowed. Like, my partner died last year. Am I still a slave? People really bringing in kind of very heavy discussions. And I can't really get into it because part of having the circle is like what happens in the circle stays in the circle. So I'm not going to go into more detail than that, but I just wanted to kind of give you guys an example of like how powerful that type of discussion can be. And if you have one in your community, if you haven't gone yet, please do, because oh my gosh, it really, really helps you understand the differences between sort of the online presentation of BDSM relationships, how glorified they can be, how perfect they can seem. Even with presenters in real life communities, it can seem that way too. And like this really kind of breaks it down and shows you the realness of what it is to be a slave, a submissive in an everyday way, and kind of being able to lean on each other and have that support network. And I'm even thinking like maybe in a couple months when like the house is kind of ready, we've got furniture and everything, that like maybe I'll start my own support group. I think that would be really great. And I especially think that we don't really have one for an all ages, all relationship styles, all gender identities sort of way. At least here they can be very segregated based on your gender identity or your relationship style or your age. And I think having something that's really accessible to everyone is so important, and that's what this space was. Now, going into the next set of classes, there were 2 that I was having to choose between that were very difficult. One was Life on the Other Side of a Consent Violation, which is basically how do you handle things when you've gone through a consent violation, which I think is really important. But the one that I ended up going to was called Growing White Resilience. Now that title is a little bit scary because apparently the term white resilience is used by neo-Nazis and nationalists, who would have guessed. But it was a class talking about the intersection of like white identity in the BDSM community and recognizing like racism problems that we might have within kink. And I don't like getting into politics too much on my channel, so I won't really get into the details too much here, but it was basically talking about like, hey, how can we as white people in the community make sure we are making space and listening to the concerns of people of color? How can we hold each other accountable so we're not holding on to racist bias in our play, or that we are making sure we're creating spaces where everybody feels welcome? And I think that is a really important conversation, and I really applaud Master and Slave Rook for having this conversation and facilitating it. And again, if I could interview them, if I could have them on this channel to have more of this sort of conversation, I would love it. They're also current title holders this year, so maybe I can have them do that as part of their like service of being title holders. We'll see. I will let you guys know if I end up getting that together, because I think that would be great. Now, the next class set, I went to something from Sir Daddy Dwan and Slave Girl J, which was called And the Gods Laughed. Now, I first saw them at the first ever Leather Rain that I went to, and their class was something that really spoke to me because their background is they're truck drivers and they drive around the country and they're in an MS relationship, and Daddy Dwan actually has multiple sclerosis and dealing with that. And so their first class is really like, how do you kind of navigate having an MS relationship where you were in super close quarters and also living with a disability at the same time. And I thought that was amazing. And this year they had a completely added approach to it because Slave Girl J actually had a very rapidly progressing cancer, and like by the time they got to the hospital she was like 4 hours away from dying, and it completely changed her life. They had to go through chemo, they had to like completely turn everything upside down, and it's a story about them really being able to rely on their community for support, and then also figuring out how do you rely on each other, you know. And the gods laughed because humans make plans and then they totally get fucked up. Basically, like, how do you deal with it when your life plans get totally fucked up? How can you plan for and prepare for a mental health emergency, a physical health emergency, suddenly something like cancer? Because it can happen. These are not the conversations we're having in BDSM spaces, and we need to be, because these things happen. And so it was them sharing their wisdom, sharing their ideas, and also like giving us a whole freaking prompt here of like how you can plan for these things. You know, how can you know what your normal is? How can you know how you're going to manage stress? And I love that. I appreciate them so much for doing that. And then on Saturday, classes ended at 4:30, so those were all the classes for that day. The dungeon didn't reopen until 9:30, so we had a long break where we got to go home and get refreshed, and it was great. Now, we went to the vendors area as well on Saturday, and it was definitely smaller. It was only 4 people, but quality over quantity. It doesn't need to be 10,000 people. I did have bunny floggers there, which I love. I have my moose flogger from them, and it's one of my favorite toys. And they also had another brand that I had never heard of before, which is kind of unusual for me because I'm an encyclopedia of this knowledge, remember? And it was Ritz Crackers whips. And they have all sorts of different kinds of whips. They had snake whips, bull whips. They had a Florida cow whip, which I had never heard of before. They have a lot of vegan options as well. But the reason why I really liked this place is they had this like handheld flogger that was called the Big D flogger, because it's a flogger that's basically all assembled on like a really big D ring. And the reason actually why that toy was developed was because they knew someone who had a disability. I think they had a shoulder joint issue, and so they weren't able to do a more traditional flogger swing anymore, but they still wanted to be able to do that type of impact play. So it's basically designed to be able to use kind of like this, I think. I don't know, I'm not a top. Well, I kind of am. Not that good yet. Anyways, it was really great, and basically it's very intuitive to use. It's very easy to swing. It's more receptive, like more predictable than especially whips, but also other types of floggers can be, so you can get in really close and kind of controlled and know exactly where you're going to be going, which is great, and I would highly recommend it. So if you are in the area where Ritz Crackers vendors from, or if you like to go to their website, link to that will be down below. But it was very small, wasn't really much to speak about, but there were some options there, and if you were looking for impact play toys, they definitely had you covered. Now for the dungeon party that night, let's make sure we talk about that as well. It was not even like really what I remembered from previous Leather Rain. So it is a hotel, so basically what they do is they shove all of the classrooms together and make one giant ballroom space, and then they have, you know, different equipment pieces set up. There might be hard points, St. Andrew's crosses, cages, play mats, kind of depending on the event and what they have available. And in the past when we went, I remember it being bigger because it was at a different hotel last time we went, and I also remember that it was darker. This was actually probably one of the more brightly lit dungeons I've ever been to. Like it was almost like the lighting I have in here right now. Like it was, everything could very clearly be seen. There was not a DJ. I think they had like somebody's Spotify playlist or something, so the music was like a weird combination of like different genres, where like it would be like Beyonce and like Britney Spears, and then it would be like something like obscure and goth, and then it would be like back to like top 40, and then it would be Rihanna, and like it was a little bit all over the place, which for a convention that kind of makes sense, especially when it's quieter, it's smaller like this one. You know, don't pay for a DJ if you don't have to. It was just like a little bit weird how it all flowed together, because without somebody like directly controlling the music, there would be like several seconds of total silence where no music was playing before the next song would start. And for me, that can really get into my headspace a lot. You know, if there's music, it has to be kind of continual and ongoing and flowing. Otherwise, I won't notice when it goes quiet. I won't notice. Unless you have me in headphones and a bunch of other shit, I am tuned into the music. That is what I am focusing on. So that kind of messes with me a little bit. It wasn't really a big deal, but worth mentioning if you kind of want to know what the dungeon space was like. Now, despite the fact that it was smaller, it was quite busy. There were definitely lots of people in chairs waiting, and everything was really busy. It was a lot of, I guess, more traditional impact play scenes from what I saw that night. Lots of like people naked, flogging each other, a little bit of rope here and there, maybe a spanking, maybe somebody in a schoolgirl outfit. Ooh, very naughty. Not to make fun of that at all, just to give you guys a picture. The one sort of thing I saw that was more like role play heavy was like somebody in like a full-on nun costume, and let me tell you, I respected the heckin' heck out of that nun because it was a very high quality costume. It was not something they got off the rack. They put time and energy into that nun outfit, and I appreciated it. There's also some puppy play happening. There were a few other things, but not really anything out of the ordinary for a dungeon. So if you've been before, you know what to expect. I don't think it was too intimidating for new people either. Like if it was your first real dungeon experience, I think it was quite friendly, quite easy, quite welcoming. We did a scene there. It was perfectly fine, you know, nothing I really want to share on the internet, but we did a scene. It was good. We went home. We were in bed at like 1. We were so exhausted. And the next day, we didn't actually get there on Sunday until 12:30. Let me again show you guys the schedule for that. Sunday is definitely the wind down day. A lot of people go home, especially if they're traveling from out of town. So it's quite small. Basically, the big thing on Sunday is they have the brunch meeting with an unknown address to go with the keynote speaker from the dinner and from the opening ceremony. And then they just had a couple of classes. We did go to a new class by an educator named Naj that was called Indelible, Permanently Marking Property. And that one was very informative, going into different ways that you can create permanent marks on purpose and kind of understanding how skin might react in different ways. And it was very interesting because Naj definitely has a very different risk profile compared to a lot of other educators that have talked about this subject. Like usually they're very like, you have to get the single use sterile scalpels and this is like the whole cleaning procedure. And it was like, yeah, you can cut people with glass if you want to. And it was like, I'm sorry, what? We're cutting people with obsidian now. Okay, noted. That's not necessarily a thing that's in my risk profile, but I did, you know, at least appreciate that they do acknowledge that different people have different risk tolerances for that sort of thing. You know, not everybody necessarily wants to do the super like medical procedural exact best practices thing. Like some people accept a little bit more risk in their life, and that's really a theme of this conference because it is MS. There are a lot of people who do consensual non-consent. There are a lot of people who have power exchange relationships where they do accept kind of more risk than maybe the average Joe doing a scene in a dungeon would do. And so I got it. It was cool. It was interesting, and I definitely walked away wanting to learn a lot more about cottering tools. So there you go. The very last class that we took on that weekend was Who's Driving Here?, which is also by Master Scott and Slave Lion. Mr. Tex did not join me for that. There was another class called Embracing Your Inner Humiliation Slut that he wanted to take instead. So I saw Who's Driving Here?, which is basically a conversation about power exchange relationship struggles, where, you know, who's actually really in control? What happens if you really don't feel like a slave anymore? What if your dom's not subbing up to the plate like they used to? What if you aren't being as obedient as you want to be? What if something in your real life is getting in the way? How can you get over trust issues? How can you build greater bonding in your relationship? And it was so great, so informative, and again, really goes into that aspect of talking about BDSM relationships as they really are. Not how we picture them to be, not how we dream in our fantasies, but what does it mean to be in an MS relationship where sometimes your master isn't always so masterly and your slave isn't always so slavey, and maybe you're not feeling the way you want to feel in your relationship, and how can you navigate that? And what the fuck does it mean if you're 5 years into a relationship and you wake up one day and you're like, fuck, I thought we were doing a property and owner thing, but I sure don't feel like property right now. How do we deal with that? And it was, again, so informative. I'm really hoping I'm going to be able to have a conversation with those educators because they were so real, so honest, and I really appreciated it. Now, before we wrap up this video, I do just want to point out a few other things on the schedule that I left out that I did not get to attend. There is one thing in particular that is quite well known on Saturday, and that would be they have a like super extra level like intensive, and that would be the dinner is served practical skills for serving at table, and it literally goes from 9 a.m. to 4:30, and you literally serve like a full-on actual dinner. I have never been before because I've taken table serving classes at other places, and like there's so many other cool things that I want to learn about. But if you want to learn about service, if you want to travel, if you want to be in the area, that is where you go, because you are getting a full-on, real, practical, hands-on experience of how to actually set and serve a formal dining table. So that is a really big draw for a lot of people because, you know, service is a thing that a lot of other people like. I don't know what else to say besides that. There are also different socials that get hosted. There was a photography area that was by the dungeon, and yeah, that was basically it. There was a hospitality room, which I think I mentioned already. There was the brunch. There is also a 12-step meeting as well as a MASS meeting, and that stands for Master and Slaves Together, which is sort of a national organization that has different chapters to it where you go and it's Masters and Slaves Together. I've never been, so I don't really know a whole lot about it, but it's a feature that's there. And yeah, that was basically my experience at Leather Rain 2019. I did really enjoy this conference. I like the fact that it's smaller and more intimate. I really appreciate the sorts of people they have on that present from all over the country that are talking about these really difficult issues within BDSM that we don't spend enough time talking about. I don't spend enough time talking about. I feel very called out by this entire convention that I'm not doing the right thing with my channel. But in all seriousness though, I do want to have more conversations like these, and you guys will see that in some upcoming videos because I want to give you guys the realest. I want to show you guys the nitty, the gritty, the ugly, the wonderful, the horrible, the amazing aspects of being in BDSM, because it's not always pretty, it's not always perfect, and I know that from being online for so long, if you only present the good, the happy, the best practices, people are going to get a very skewed understanding of what BDSM really is, and it's not always that clean cut. But overall, I would absolutely recommend Leather Rain. I love it. I will keep going as long as they keep having it. I love it. I love it. I love it. I love it. Now, I just want to emphasize really quickly, and I'm running out of time because I need to go live stream, but this is really important. This is a convention for everyone. They emphasize that in the advertising, in the website online. It is for everyone. Yes, it is leather and MS, but it is something for everyone. If people there were not wearing leathers, you would not know that they were BDSM. You would have no way of knowing, pretty much. There are some people who maybe it's a little bit more like, you seem like you might be on the alternative relationship track, but it's just for normal, average, everyday people. There are people who are older. The average age is probably like 55 for most people who go to this convention, but there are also definitely people who are younger. There are people in my age range. There are trans people. There are queer people. There are people of color. Everyone is welcome at this convention. Now, does that always mean it's easy? Does that always mean everybody is equally accepted? There's no bias, there's no racism, there's no ageism, there's no isms of any kind? Absolutely not. But part of having this convention, part of having this is so we can have those conversations where we do talk about those issues that, like, hey, you know, racism and BDSM, we're not perfect. It's a thing that happens. Ageism, it happens. Bias, it happens. You know, and I really just appreciate the work that they've done to make sure we can have those conversations, and so we can start to address those issues so we can have a better, healthier, happier, more welcoming community long term. Again, I just really appreciate it. Links to the convention, anything I mentioned, will be down in the description box below. I would love to hear your thoughts about this. Have you guys ever been to a conference like this yourself? Are you leather? Are you MS? Let me know down in the comments section below. If you like this video, if you want to see more from me, please do subscribe. I make videos twice a week about all sorts of BDSM related subjects. And finally, if you want to support my channel, the best way you can do that is through Patreon. Link to that will be down below. If you already do that over there, thank you so much. It means the absolute world to me. And until I see you guys next time, I hope you have a great rest of your day and a great rest of your week. Bye-bye.